All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Engineering Major, Philosophy Minor. And in tonight's video, we are going to continue with some readings from the Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. That is this book right here. In case you didn't watch the previous video that I made on this channel, basically I'm switching things up a little bit. And for the time being, I'm just simply going to be reading passages from this book that I think are interesting. And I'm not going to be giving any of my own personal analysis on these topics. I'm going to go ahead and rely on you guys to just listen to the words, analyze it for yourself, and just kind of think about it in terms of engineering and philosophy and politics and social issues and all those other things. And hopefully at some point in time in the future, I will be able to analyze these things in certain contexts, but right now I'd prefer to just read to you guys and have you guys interpret. And of course, you're welcome to comment below with your opinions, and I will go through and read those as well. So let's go ahead and just get into the text just to set the stage. In the last video, I read a few pages that discussed Article 58, which is one of the criminal codes that was introduced in Soviet Russia after the Russian Revolution. And this was a criminal code that was used to arrest and also a lot more than just arrest, but for right now, we'll just say arrest tens of millions of people. And so in this next section, Alexander Solzhenitsyn is going to discuss how some of these sections were actually applied to people. So let's go ahead and begin. Oh, and of course, I will leave images at the end of the video up so you can see the sections that I read and you can go through them yourself if you want to pause the video or whatever. But for now, let's go ahead and just listen to this passage. Here is one vignette from those years as it actually occurred. A district party conference was underway in Moscow province. It was presided over by a new secretary of the district party committee, replacing one recently arrested. At the conclusion of the conference, a tribute to Comrade Stalin was called for. Of course, everyone stood up, just as everyone had leaped to his feet during the conference at every mention of his name being Stalin. The small hall echoed with stormy applause rising to an ovation. For 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, the stormy applause rising to an ovation continued. But palms were getting sore and raised arms were already aching, and the older people were panting from exhaustion. It was becoming insufferably silly, even to those who really adored Stalin. However, who would dare be the first to stop? The secretary of the district party committee could have done it. He was standing on the platform, and it was he who had just called for the ovation. But he was a newcomer. He had taken the place of a man who'd been arrested. He was afraid. After all, NKVD men were standing in the hall applauding and watching to see who quit first. And in that obscure small hall, unknown to the leader, Stalin himself, the applause went on 6, 7, 8 minutes. They were done for. Their goose was cooked. They couldn't stop now till they collapsed with heart attacks. At the rear of the hall, which was crowded, they could of course cheat a bit, clap less frequently, less vigorously, not so eagerly. But up there with the Presidium, where everyone could see them, the director of the local paper factory, an independent and strong-minded man, stood with the Presidium. Aware of all the falsity and all the impossibility of the situation, he still kept on applauding. 9 minutes, 10. In anguish, he watched the secretary of the district party committee, but the latter dared not stop. Insanity, to the last man. With make-believe enthusiasm on their faces, looking at each other with faint hope, the district leaders were just going to go on and on applauding till they fell where they stood, till they were carried out of the hall on stretchers. And even then, those who were left would not falter. Then, after 11 minutes, the director of the paper factory assumed a businesslike expression and sat down in his seat. And oh, a miracle took place. Where had the universal, uninhibited, undescribable enthusiasm gone? To a man, everyone else stopped dead and sat down. They had been saved. The squirrel had been smart enough to jump off his revolving wheel. That, however, was how they discovered who the independent people were. And that was how they went about eliminating them. That same night, the factory director was arrested. They easily pasted 10 years on him on the pretext of something quite different. But after he had signed Form 206, the final document of the interrogation, his interrogator reminded him, "Don't ever be the first to stop applauding." And just what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to stop? Now that's what Darwin's natural selection is, and that's also how to grind people down with stupidity. But today, a new myth is being created. Every story of 1937 that is printed, every reminiscence that is published, relates without exception the tragedy of the communist leaders. They have kept on assuring us, and we have unwittingly fallen for it, that the history of 1937 and 1938 consisted chiefly of the arrests of the big communists and virtually no one else. But out of the millions arrested at that time, important party and state officials could not possibly have represented more than 10%. Most of the relatives standing in line with food parcels outside the Leningrad prisons were lower class women, the sort who sold milk. A couple pages later, a plumber turned off the loudspeaker in his room every time the endless letters to Stalin were being read. His next-door neighbor denounced him. Where is that neighbor today? He got SOE, socially dangerous element, 8 years. A half-literate stove maker used to enjoy writing his name in his free time. This raised his self-esteem. There was no blank paper around, so he wrote on newspapers. His neighbors found his newspaper in the sack on the communal toilet, with pen and ink flourishes across the countenance of the father and teacher. Anti-Soviet agitation, 10 years. Stalin and those close to him loved their portraits and splashed them all over the newspapers and issued them in millions of copies. The flies paid little heed to their sanctity, and it was a pity not to make use of the paper. And how many unfortunates got a term for that? Arrests rolled through the streets and apartment houses like an epidemic. Just as people transmit an epidemic infection from one to another without knowing it, by such innocent means as a handshake, a breath, handing someone something, so too they passed on the infection of inevitable arrest by a handshake, by a breath, by a chance meeting on the street. For if you are destined to confess tomorrow that you organized an underground group to poison the city's water supply, and if today I shake hands with you on the street, that means I too am doomed. Continuing on about another page later. Should we wrap it all up and simply say that they arrested the innocent? But we omitted saying that the very concept of guilt had been repealed by the proletarian revolution and, at the beginning of the 30s, was defined as rightist opportunism. So we can't even discuss these out-of-date concepts, guilt and innocence. So guys, that's all I'm going to read. But go back and listen to some of this, or at the end of the video, I'll put images up of the text and you can read it for yourself. But I think one interesting takeaway from this is especially this last part. The very concept of guilt had been repealed by the proletarian revolution. So imagine, I know I said I wasn't going to give any analysis, but imagine what the world looks like when there's no such thing as guilt or innocence, and just kind of reel that over in your minds a little bit when you think about justice, because I think the concept of guilt and innocence is extremely important. It's it's what defines criminal activity versus innocuous behavior. So anyway, guys, that's all I'm going to read for tonight. I've got, there's a ton more in here that I would love to read to you guys. And maybe after the next video of reading this, I'll switch it up to a different book that I'm working through right now. But in the meantime, enjoy this. Stay tuned for the images of the text if you want to read it yourself. And I will catch you guys in the next one. Good night.